Welcome back. This is part two of a four-part series on mind control. Now, let me set the stage again. What I'm doing in part one and part two is just showing you the extent to which the global financial elite who control all the companies of the world are willing to go to in order to control each and every one of you, every nation in the world, every government in the world, every bank, every corporation, every single solitary aspect of your life. So with that, let's dig into this, and we're going to dig deeper into what they're willing to do to control you. So what you see here is a montage of the various false flag events that we've been afflicted with. So let's start, and I'm going to give you some history as we go along. So the first thing you see up in the upper left there is the Lusitania, and that took us into World War I, and it was 21 million people who got killed. But first, let's go back to what really started that war. Basically, that was a cruise ship that was going off and from New York, and the Germans knew they had been watching that ship be loaded, and they knew it was loaded with ammunition. So they actually had a news put into the New York Post and said, if you send that ship into the war zone, we're going to sink it because it's a legitimate target. So years, decades later, guess what we found? We found that ship, and guess what? It had munitions. It was a legit. So basically the government of the United States baited Germany so that they would sink that ship so that we could get into World War I. Now, why would we want to do that? And what's the backstory to it? So let's go back and look at a little history. So basically, as we went into that event, you know who our best friend was in Europe? It was Germany. It wasn't England. It wasn't France. It was Germany. It was Germany that was adopting the American system, that was building factories, that was building the railroads. And because of what they were doing, they were a threat to the global financial elite, to Britain in particular, and to the control of the empire by sea. So the whole thing was to concoct a war to basically get rid of all the manufacturing that Germany had, to get rid of the transcontinental railroads that were being built across Europe, that were going to go all around the world, every place except Australia. So Russia was building a Trans-Siberian line that was going to cut across the Bering Strait into Alaska, down into America. Now we have a line going east to west. Now we have going north to south. McKinley was negotiating a railroad line to go down through Mexico, Central America, into South America. And then we're going to come across Gibraltar into Africa. And basically the power of the global financial elite was going to be crushed. So they had to have a war. So they came to the people who control the United States, who were their puppets, who were put into power. And basically they said, we want you to turn against your ally, Germany, come into the war on the side of England, and here's what you'll get. You're thousands of miles away from the theater of war. You'll never be invaded. You will be able to sell massive amounts of armaments to the Allies and become very, very rich. And after the war, you'll get to rebuild all of Europe, and America will emerge as absolutely the undisputed superpower of the world. So we betrayed Germany, and we went into the war in order to defend what? The global financial elite who were enslaving us. And that, if that doesn't tell you that our politicians are working against us and not for us. And when I say that we haven't had an honest election since McKinley, I mean it. When they found out that they could buy a president, McKinley, then they knew that they could buy anybody, a congressman, a senator, a governor, a mayor, anybody, a banker, a corporate leader, anybody. And they just went forward, basically expanding their grip on power. Let's go on now. We're going to go to the next event that happened. And that's going to take us over to the Gulf of Tonkin. And that took us into Vietnam, and 3.8 million people were killed in that event. And we found out later that the PT boat 833, it wasn't really attacked. It was just another false flag event to get us into a war. And I want to take you through some of the history on Vietnam. It just happens that it had its own little scandal. And basically what happens is we had the Pentagon Papers that came out as we were many, many years into this war. And it disclosed that going into it, they knew from the get-go that that war, because of geography of Vietnam, couldn't be won. It was a war that was designed to last for decades. And so once the war was over, over, here's what happened. The Pentagon Papers come out. Now massive amounts of protests happening in the United States. The heat comes on the Nixon administration, and they say, okay, we got to finally end this war. So guess what happens? After the war is over, a general writes a book, and you know what he tells us? Just what histories tell us about every war. Basically, if you cut off the supply line to the enemy, the war ends. You win. And so basically what we did, end that war after all those years, remind the Haiphong Harbor, which fills with soot at an amazing rate, has to be dredged 24/7, 365. And within 6 weeks, the harbor was clogged, the supply lines were cut, and the war was in the throes of being ended, period. Wars for profit, wars for control, and it doesn't make any difference to them how many of us cockroaches they kill. We're just useless eaters. Then let's go to Pearl Harbor. We talked about that a little earlier. So basically, Roosevelt was baiting the Japanese to come in and attack Pearl Harbor to take us into the war. So it's more than just the 3,000 or so sailors that were killed that day. It was the 60 million people that were killed and the 15 million that were wounded. They will do anything. So this is all gearing up so that you will understand that to brainwash us is nothing. It's just absolutely something. They go into a board meeting and sit down and they say, how do we control the people? We don't care what you have to do. The goal is to control us. And then this picture you see to the left is what we were talking about before. That's that interview that we had with David Rockefeller and Aaron Russo. And that was regarding disclosure of what? Of 9/11 and the Iraq War and the 4.5 million people that died subsequently because of that false flag event. Let's go back a little bit deeper in history. Remember, God told me when he gave me this assignment 57 years ago, go to the next slide, that you were going to be assigned to be an historian. And the reason why is because history, once it's happened, becomes cast in concrete, and they can't call you a conspiracy theory. Then the next part of my education was to read the Bible, and because the Bible was 70% history as well, and then to read a myriad of other things. So I'm going to take you through basically the entire history of the United States on one slide. So we come from England in order to be able to have guns, in order to be able to basically work without being taxed by the government, and to have the right to own land. And so we fight the Revolutionary War, and we ostensibly win. But guess what? The strategy that they have inflicted on us forever was evoked right there at that moment. They drove us into debt with the war, and before Washington was even out of office, we declared bankruptcy, and we were once again under the crown, and the American public was being taxed on their labor. Exactly the reason we wrote the Constitution in the first place. Then fast forward to 1812 and 1811, the charter on the first central bank of the United States expired, and Congress said we're not going to renew it. And the British wrote an article in the British Times, and it said what? We will return you to colonial status. And that became the War of 1812, otherwise known as the Second Revolutionary War. And then let's go to the Civil War. And most people, because the victors write the news, they write the history books, they have no idea why we were in that war. They think it was a war to free the slaves. It was not. It was a war that was orchestrated by Britain because they thought America was getting too powerful. After we had the Louisiana Purchase, basically we had a river system that was better than any other system in the world. We had access to the oceans. We were growing, and they were afraid that we were going to become too powerful. So they sent their spies into the South and basically concocted the cause for the war. Well, you guys here in the South, you're dependent on agriculture. You're dependent on free trade from us, while the North is your enemy because they're industrializing and they want to take you out from under our free trade system. So it was all about economics, all about trade, all about keeping the slavery system of the British free trade system in place. So where in the world did the story about the slaves come in? Because Lincoln realized that the British people, not the government, were against slavery. So what he did is he decided to announce the Emancipation Proclamation. And what that did was it kept British in the background. Instead of coming into the war frontally, they had to do what they did in the background. And that's why when Lincoln was killed, 8 spies from England were hung. That next takes us to World War I. We talked about it a little bit a minute ago. So there you see the Lusitania, another false flag event. Then we go down to World War II. We see Pearl Harbor, and then we go to Vietnam, and we've already talked about how that was another false flag event. And then 9/11, and we now know that was a false flag event. So the only one we haven't talked about is the Middle East. And basically, why did they want to do that? There's always a myriad of reasons, and what they do with forethought and with intent. And so what happened is a couple of nations in the Middle East wanted to do the unthinkable. They wanted to have a gold-backed currency and get out from under the central banking system, and they couldn't allow that. And then they also wanted to control oil, and one of the nations in the Middle East wasn't playing their game. Basically, Saudi Arabia had signed the petro deal with us, and they were under basically in league with the United States. But Saddam Hussein said, nope, I'm not giving you my oil. And so that's why we had the Middle East war. That's what it was all about. And basically there was one other thing that was going on. They wanted to basically collapse the United States and Europe because they were moving towards setting up their one world government. Think about what we talked about with China, with them having set up the technology to implement the global beast system. So they wanted to cause the instability in the Middle East that would cause a massive influx of millions of Muslims going into Europe, so that what would happen is they all have multiple wives. They would outbirth the indigenous people in Europe, and within sight of a generation, a Muslim would be the majority population, and they would be pushing for Sharia law, and Europe as we know it would no longer exist. And that takes us full circle to what they're doing now to America with the influx of 10 to 20 million people that have come in since the Biden administration. Are you seeing the big picture, folks? Are you seeing that there's nothing, absolutely nothing that they won't do to control us and to enslave us? And thinking of that, let's go to the next slide, and we'll see that this entourage of wars wasn't enough. They said, you know what? A pandemic is even better. Let's create a pandemic, and that will bring us to the point that we can cause the cascade where we can lock them down completely, utterly, and absolutely control them and financially break them and break their will, and thus enter COVID. And remember now, there were several patents that were disclosed. So this was a man-made virus, a man-made pandemic that was released in order to take them to their end game, which was to basically collapse the entire world and create the reset. The whole world goes into submission, into lockdown, into financial slavery, and they birth their new world order in the reset. And let's go to these next slides, and we're going to get into a little of the psychology behind this. So basically, that man up there, Yuval Noah Harari, I think he's just unbelievable evil. Here's what he had to say. The most important question in the 21st century economics may well be what? What should we do with all the what? Superfluous people once we have highly intelligent, non-conscious algorithms that can do almost everything better than the humans? There we are. We're useless eaters, and we have no value to them. We are in their way. So I need you to understand the goal of the Georgia Guidestones was to create a world in which there were 500 million people, stated right in the UN documents. Their goal is to have no more than 1 billion people. So if you think these wars were the worst thing that's come, you're naive. They've already given us one pandemic, and trust me, from what I've read, they're planning on giving us an even more virulent one. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to see a little bit more about what they're willing to do to us. So I guess you guys probably recognize this guy's picture, Carl Schwab, and he's the guy who said recently, you will own nothing and be happy. And that's speaking to the generation that is the youth of this nation. And why is that important? Because it was basically President Reagan who said the following. He said, we are never more than one generation from losing our nation. Why? Because the youth always becomes the leaders of the next generation. And if they can keep the youth of the United States in check, where they have absolutely no financial freedom, where they can't buy a house, where they can't pay their bills, where they're in basically subjection, sorry about that, so that we can utterly control them. So here's where this quote comes out. Schwab envisions a world where artificial intelligence, that's AI, has effectively done what? Obsoleted mankind. It is a world where AI and robots are taking over most of the jobs, and the elite no longer need us. So we become those useless eaters. We become the 7 billion people that stand in their way. We become the cockroaches that they're willing to step on. That's what we're looking at, folks. Let's go on down, and we're going to bring Donald Trump into the equation. And he came out in the beginning, and people just thought he was terrible. He said fake news, and he pushed against all those people. Well, guess what? I think by now we found out that there's a mask in front of all the news media. They're all controlled, and they're all spinning lies at us. And here's what they've done. They control all the spheres of influence. And so there's nowhere we can go to get the truth. So in the absence of the truth, the lie becomes the truth because there's nothing to compare it to. That's what they've done to us. Let's go on down to the next slide, and I'll show you exactly what they've done. Oh, look at this. Look at all those choices we have for the news. Look at that. We got CNBC, we got Fox News, ABC, we've got CNN. Oh man, we have all these choices. We have Google, we have Apple, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have Microsoft. No, we don't. We have one, because there's a fact that most people don't know. Every one of those feeds goes through Reuters, and Reuters is controlled by the global financial elite. So basically, all of these entities get a script every month, every day, saying, this is what you will say. This is the brainwashing script for the American people for today. We have not been given any truth. And perhaps the most dangerous of all of those entities is Fox News, because there we think we're getting the truth, because they say we're fair and balanced. We give you the truth, and we basically balance it. We don't weigh it to either side. No, folks, that's not what they do. They give you a big portion of the truth, and then they mingle it with a half truth, and then they mingle it with a lie, and then they spin it in order to claim that they're fair and balanced. And when you're done, you're so confused, you don't know what to do. So folks, if you think you live in a society where you have the truth coming at you every day, you don't. You have a monopoly that's coming at you that does nothing but feed you lies intended to control and manipulate you and make you passive. Let's go down to the next slide, and we're going to see how it all works out. He who controls the money controls the world. So basically, with their money, they buy the politicians, they buy the banks, they buy the corporations, they buy the military-industrial complex. And remember, it was Eisenhower who warned us what they were going to be doing with all these false flag events. And so they control the military. And look at the education system. First thing Trump did was get rid of the Department of Education. We just talked about the media. It's all one source, all rolling through Reuters. And then you go to the entertainment industry, and that's here maybe the most dangerous one of all, because we've got our filters off. We're just being entertained. And meanwhile, they're flashing subliminal images on the screen. Go back and pull up some stuff on Disney, and you'll see it's full of pedophile stuff. Unbelievable. And then they control our religions through 501(c)s and muzzle them. And go back in history again. And when we fought the Revolutionary War, we wouldn't have probably won if it wasn't for the pastors. They were called the Black Robe Regiment, and they took their congregation out, and they basically fought guerrilla war against the British, cutting off the supply lines. No supplies, no war. Without them, we probably would have lost, and now they're muzzled. So, folks, this is the world you live in, a world of absolute, complete, and utter control. And basically, the global financial elite control all the spheres of influence. He who controls money controls the world, because all of those segments of society are bought and are puppeted, and you don't get hardly any truth at all. Let's go to the next slide, and I want to take you into the psychology of how they control and manipulate you. So basically, they have their bought and paid for politicians at the top ranks of the government, and then they have community organizing groups at the bottom. And remember, Barack Obama, he served both roles. When he came out of Harvard, he first became a community organizer in Chicago, then he became a congressman, and then he became the president. Here's what he orchestrated while he was in. And guess what? It's not just him. Every president. This is how they basically inflict us with laws and with legislation that that is absolutely against our best interest. They get their community organizing groups, and let's use Obama as the example. He was a Muslim, and therefore, if he was a Muslim, he means that we're infidels and we're his enemy. And just one little piece out of his history, he said when he was president that he would reduce the size of the American military to a level, what? Acceptable to his Muslim brothers. And he was supposedly a gay. And here's what he said: I want to champion same-sex marriage. So he funneled money into the community organizing groups, and they pushed same-sex marriage. And then the media amplified that message. And then he could stand up and say, it's the will of the people, and we're going to have same-sex marriage. The next thing you know, we had it. And the next thing you know, we have LGBT movement. And the next thing you know, we have the DEI movement. And the next thing you know, we have boys going into girls' locker rooms. And the next thing you know, we have men and girls' sports. And the next thing you know, there's a female boxer that gets hit by a guy. And she's hit so hard that she just walks out of the ring. And basically, that's how they control us, folks. That's what they do every single solitary time. They push us from the bottom, distort the message, claim that it's the will of the people, and come down with an iron fist from the top. And the next thing we know, we have got something that is intended to further enslave America, to make us passive, to make us give up, to make us stand and just take it. But we're not going to take it. So let's go to the next slide, and that's going to wrap up this segment. Here is where we get into the propaganda. Here's where we get into the mind control. Here's where they started it. And next week, we're going to get into stuff that's way deeper than this. So here's what they said. Joseph Stalin understood it completely. America's too strong to take down from the outside. First, we have to soften them up from the inside. If we can destroy them from the inside, then maybe we can take them from the outside. So here's what the global elite has been doing to us. Here it is right here. He said, America is like a healthy body, and its resistance is its patriotism, its morality, and its spirituality. Listen, if we can undermine these three areas, America will collapse from the inside out. And so think about Rome, think about Greece, think about all the nations that adopted homosexuality, think about the decline in morality, think about how they divided us. When I was a kid, I went to school, and every morning we stood up and we had to pledge allegiance to the flag. And in the school I was in, we prayed, and all that's taken away from us. They've taken away the family. They've neutered the father as the core of the family and made us what? We're caustic, whatever we are. So basically, they undermine us at the very foundation. And when we get into the stuff next week and we start talking about MK Ultra and the other things that they've done, you're going to see that these movies that they put out, they're just showing us. They have to, for some reason or other, tell us what they're going to do to us. So we'll be talking about the Bourne Identity, and you'll find out that they can basically erase your memory completely, create a new persona, cause you to do whatever they want, espionage, assassinations, whatever, and then you won't even remember that you did it. The things that they can do, the science that they've applied, the way that they control us goes far beyond what the public can even begin to imagine. So tomorrow, our next week, I should say, we're going to go into part 3 and part 4, and I hope that you come away from this understanding in no uncertain terms that they will do anything to control us, that we are nothing but cockroaches to be destroyed. So with that, we go back to where we always finish. Please buy this book, because I'm telling you, we're getting ready to have an avalanche of truth come out, and we need an army of people, because here's what we need to not have happen. We need to have enough people that are red pilled, that know what's going on. And this book will really red pill you so that we don't have civil war in this nation, because that's another one of the things they want to do. Everything they've done for the last generation is designed to divide us and conquer us. And God knows that a nation divided cannot stand, and they know it too. So that's why telling you about all this brainwashing is so important. But after we finish that next week, you've got to basically subscribe. You've got to start following me. I'm going to go into a very extensive series, and what we're going to talk about is what's coming. We're coming to the everything financial collapse. It's not going to be based on the stock market. It's not going to be based on real estate. It's going to be based on all the economic engines that run this country. And you need to know, because if you don't know, you're going to become a victim. and you're going to lose everything you have. But there's a strategy, and it comes straight from history. They do just what Sun Tzu said they shouldn't do. Sun Tzu said there's a myriad of opportunities. You should never repeat the same thing again, because there'll be somebody out there smart enough to see the pattern. That's why God made me a historian. I'm a strategic analyst who derives pieces from history that gives me the ability to see things from a 60,000 square foot view. So when I start talking about finances in the week after next, it's not going to be hypothetical. It's going to be coming right out of the pages of history. And you're going to see that what they do with every financial collapse is the same. And therefore, you're going to see that the solutions that'll save your butt are the same. So tune in, and I'm going to give you the scorecard that you need in order to understand where to put your finances, not specific financial advice, but the categories, the understanding of what they're going to do and the maneuvers that you need to make in order to come out of this, not the loser, but to actually potentially prosper in what's coming. And why do I say that? Because I hope that the people who are watching this are Christians, and God has promised what? The transfer of wealth from the wicked to the righteous. So that's something else that we're going to get into in that series, how God is orchestrating the money to be taken from the wicked and given to the righteous. So folks, don't be pessimistic. Don't be afraid of what's coming. We're going to have a blueprint that's going to walk you through this. And if you'll just do what God wants you to do, you're going to find out that we've already won. He's already set the stage. They've already lost. They just don't know it. We'll see you next week.